The rain had been falling over the small town of Cedar Grove since early morning. Tiny drops rolled down the windows of the old animal shelter on the edge of town. Inside, dozens of dogs barked, played, and wagged their tails whenever visitors entered, all except one. At the far end of the shelter stood a rusty kennel surrounded by a second fence. A yellow sign hung on the wire, "Do not enter. Aggressive dog." Inside the kennel lay a large black and brown German shepherd. His name was Shadow. For 2 years, nobody had touched him. Not a single person. The shelter workers fed him by sliding bowls through a small opening in the fence. Whenever anyone came close, Shadow would growl, bare his teeth, and retreat to the darkest corner. Some called him dangerous. Some called him broken. Others simply called him hopeless, but nobody knew his real story. Nobody. Except one person, and that person had disappeared long ago. The shelter's director, Martha Collins, sighed as she looked at the kennel. She was 62 years old, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen hundreds of animals come and go. "Poor boy," she whispered. Shadow raised his head. For a moment, he looked at her, then he lowered it again. 2 years, 730. Days, no trust, no touch, no happiness. Martha still remembered the day he had arrived. A police officer had brought him to the shelter. The dog was covered in mud and scratches. One ear was bleeding. He refused food for 3 days. And every time someone tried to approach him, he reacted with fear and anger. Eventually, everyone gave up except Martha. Every evening she sat outside his kennel and spoke softly to him. She told him about the weather, about the birds outside, about her grandchildren, about life. She never expected him to answer, yet somehow she felt he listened. Maybe one day, she would always say, maybe one day you'll trust someone again. But after 2 years, even Martha was beginning to lose hope. She turned to leave. Suddenly, one of the volunteers ran into the office. "Martha, you'll never believe this." The young woman was breathing heavily. "What happened?" "We have a visitor." Martha smiled. "That isn't unusual." "No, this one is." The volunteer lowered her voice. "It's Keanu Reeves." Martha blinked. "What?" "Keanu Reeves is here," she laughed. "Very funny. I'm serious." Before Martha could answer, the shelter's front door opened. A tall man wearing jeans, boots, and a dark jacket stepped inside. His beard was wet from the rain. He carried no bodyguards, no cameras, no assistants. Just a small paper bag and an umbrella. Was indeed Keanu Reeves. The entire room became silent. One volunteer nearly dropped a box of dog toys. A receptionist froze. A little girl visiting the shelter whispered, "Mom." "That's John Wick." Keanu smiled politely. "Hi, everyone." The room erupted with excitement. Martha walked forward. "Mr. Reeves? Please call me Keanu." She shook his hand. "What brings you here?" He smiled. "I had a few free days. Someone told me this shelter helps older dogs find homes. We try. I wanted to visit." Martha looked confused. "You came all this way just to visit dogs?" "Sometimes," Keanu said gently. "Dogs need people more than people realize." His answer surprised everyone. He spent the next hour walking through the shelter. He greeted every employee. He sat on the floor and played with puppies. He fed treats to senior dogs. He listened to volunteers tell stories about rescued animals. There was no hurry in him, no celebrity attitude. He simply seemed happy being there. Then he heard something, a deep growl. He turned. At the end of the hallway stood the second fence. The sign, the kennel Shadow. The dog stared directly at him. "Who's that?" Keanu asked. The room suddenly became quiet. Martha sighed. "That's Shadow. He looks beautiful." "He doesn't think so." Keanu looked at her. "What happened?" Martha hesitated. "We don't know everything." She explained how the dog had arrived, how nobody could touch him, how he hadn't allowed anyone near him for 2 years. "How old is he?" "Around 6. Has anyone tried training?" "Yes." "Specialists?" "Yes." "Veterinarians?" "Yes." And nothing worked. Keanu looked at Shadow again. The dog was staring at him without moving. "May I meet him?" Several volunteers answered at once. "No, absolutely not." "He's dangerous." Martha nodded. I'm afraid that's impossible. But Keanu didn't move. He kept looking at the dog, then he said something unexpected. He's not angry. Everyone stared. A volunteer frowned. He growls at everyone. Yes, then he's angry. Keanu slowly shook his head. No. He looked toward Shadow. He's afraid. Silence. Nobody said anything. Martha looked at the dog. The first time in a long time. She wondered if she had misunderstood him. Keanu took one step toward the kennel. Shadow stood up. The volunteers gasped. He's getting ready to attack. But Keanu didn't continue. He simply stopped. Then he did something strange. He sat down, right there, on the floor, 10 feet from the outer fence. Everyone looked confused. What are you doing? Martha asked, saying hello. From here? Yes. He placed the paper bag beside him. Then he remained silent. 1 minute passed, then another, then another. Nobody understood. Finally, Martha sat beside him. You're very patient. Keanu smiled. I've learned that trust can't be forced. The rain continued outside. The shelter became strangely quiet. Shadow had not gone back to his corner. Instead, he stood watching. His ears moved slightly. 5 more minutes passed, then 10. The volunteers returned to their work. They assumed nothing would happen. After all, nothing had happened in 2 years. Then everyone heard it. A sound. Soft. Almost impossible to notice. Martha's eyes widened. Did he? Keanu nodded. Shadow had taken 1 step forward. Just one. But it was the first step toward any human in 2 years. The volunteers rushed back. One covered her mouth. No way. Another whispered, I don't believe it, Shadow. Took another step. Then another. He stopped several. Feet from the fence, Keanu remained completely. Still no sudden movements, no attempts to touch him, just patience. The dog's eyes never left him. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, Shadow sat down, exactly opposite Keanu, separated by a fence but sitting together, like 2 strangers waiting for something. Martha's eyes filled with tears. I've never seen him do that. Neither had anyone else. The shelter became completely silent. A little girl approached. Mom? Yes, is the dog making a friend? Her mother smiled softly. I think maybe he is. For nearly an hour, neither Keanu nor Shadow moved. The rain stopped. Clouds parted. Sunlight entered through the windows. And for the first time in 2 years, Shadow closed his eyes. Not completely, just halfway. A sign of calm, a sign of trust, a sign no one thought possible. Martha wiped her tears. What did you do? Keanu looked at the dog. Nothing. But sometimes, he said quietly, being willing to sit beside someone's pain is enough. Nobody answered, because somehow, it felt true. As evening arrived, Keanu finally stood. I should go. To everyone's surprise, Shadow stood too. The dog walked to the fence. Not growling, not barking, just watching. Keanu smiled. I'll see you tomorrow. Everyone laughed. You're coming back? Martha asked. Yes. Why? He looked at Shadow. Because I think he's been waiting for someone. Then something happened that froze the entire shelter. Shadow walked all the way to the front of the fence and sat, right where Keanu had been, sitting. The room became silent again. Martha covered her mouth. The volunteers stared. The little girl smiled. He doesn't want him to leave. Keanu looked at the dog for several seconds, then he slowly nodded. I know. As he walked toward the door, Shadow remained there, watching every step, not angry, not afraid, just watching. When the door finally closed, the dog stayed by the fence for the first time in 2 years. He did not return to the dark corner. Instead, he waited, as if he believed someone might actually come back. None of them knew it then, but the next morning would reveal a secret hidden for 2 long years. A secret that would explain why no one could touch Shadow, and why, out of everyone in the world, he had looked at Keanu Reeves as though he already knew him. The next morning, the Cedar Grove animal shelter opened earlier than usual. Nobody had slept well. Not Martha, not the volunteers, not even the receptionist. Everyone kept talking about the same thing. Shadow, the Dog who had refused all human contact for 2 years, had sat peacefully in front of a stranger, and not just any stranger. Keanu Reeves. At 7:30 in the morning, Martha unlocked the shelter doors. The first thing she did was look toward Shadow's kennel. She stopped. The dog was already awake. He wasn't lying in his dark corner. He was sitting by the outer fence, waiting. Martha's heart tightened. "Are you expecting him, boy?" Shadow looked at her, then back toward the entrance, as if he understood every word. For the first time in 2 years, Martha smiled. "Maybe you're not broken after all." She prepared his breakfast. Normally, Shadow waited until she walked away before touching his food. Today was different. He remained by the fence, still waiting. 10 minutes later, one of the volunteers arrived, then another. Everyone walked directly to the kennel. "He's still there. He hasn't moved." "Do you think he remembers yesterday?" Martha nodded. "I think he remembers everything." At exactly 9 o'clock, a familiar motorcycle pulled into the parking lot. The sound alone caused Shadow to stand. Every volunteer noticed. His ears lifted, his eyes widened, his tail moved only once, but it moved. The entire shelter froze. "Did you see that?" one volunteer whispered. "His tail." No one had seen Shadow wag his tail in 2 years. The front door opened. Keanu Reeves entered carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a small bag. "Morning, everyone." Before anyone answered, a loud bark echoed through the shelter. Everyone turned. Shadow was standing at the fence, not growling, not snarling, barking once. Then again. Keanu looked surprised. "Was that for me?" The volunteers looked as though they had seen a miracle. Martha laughed softly. "I believe it was." Keanu smiled. "Well, good morning to you too, buddy." He walked slowly toward the kennel. Again. He sat outside the fence. Again. Shadow sat opposite him. This time, however, the dog was much closer. Only a few feet separated them. For nearly 20 minutes, they remained there. Then Keanu spoke. "You know, I had a dog once." Shadow's ears moved. He was stubborn. A volunteer smiled. "Are you telling him stories?" Keanu nodded. "Maybe he likes stories." He looked back at Shadow. "My dog taught me something important. Animals don't care who you are. They don't care about fame or money." He smiled. "They only care whether your heart is safe." The dog blinked. Martha watched carefully. "Keep talking," she whispered. Keanu continued. "I've met people who hide pain for years. Sometimes all they need is someone willing to stay." The shelter became quiet. The words seemed meant for more than the dog. Then, an elderly volunteer named Harold approached. He had worked at the shelter for 20 years. His face looked troubled. "Can I see something?" He pulled an old file from a cabinet. "Shadows. Records." Martha frowned. "You've looked at that file 100 times." "I know." He opened it. Anyway, there wasn't much information. Male German. Shepherd, approximately 4 years old when found. No microchip, no collar, no owner. Identified. Then something slipped from the file. Photograph. Everyone looked down. Harold picked it up. "What is this?" Martha's eyes widened. "I've never seen that before." It was an old photograph, slightly damaged by water. In the picture stood a middle-aged man wearing a mechanic's uniform. Beside him sat Shadow. The dog looked happy, healthy, and smiling. On the back of the photo, The entire shelter stood in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Only the sound of the old wall clock could be heard. Tick, tick, tick. Martha still held the phone in her hand. "A letter?" Keanu finally asked. She nodded. "The police found it in an evidence box. Apparently it was among Daniel Harper's belongings, but nobody noticed it because there was no address on the envelope." "Why now?" "The officer said they're reorganizing old files. They found the envelope this morning." Everyone looked at Shadow. The dog remained beside the fence, his eyes resting on Keanu, almost as if he knew this letter mattered. "When can we get it?" Keanu asked. "In an hour." No one said anything after that. The next 60 minutes felt unusually long. Keanu